Hello and welcome to World Talks with me, Ashim Kumar. The European Commission has unveiled major reforms to its emissions trading system, the EU's flagship climate policy. Joining us to discuss the implications is Aleksander Śniegocki. He's CEO of the Reform Institute. Mr. Śniegocki, thank you very much for taking the time.
Good evening. Thank you for invitation.
Good evening. So, what is the ETS all about?
It's about going away from our reliance as Europe on fossil fuels, which also harms our climate and, in many cases, our health. And this is a system which provides a cap on our emissions of CO2. And
across the union?
Across the union.
Okay.
And then also both the Commission and the Member States sell the allowances which the companies buy, and then they can use revenues to support the transition away from fossil fuels and to reduce emissions.
Okay, so a couple of things. So when you talk about the passes, if you like, that companies can buy, you mean if a company wants to release, 100 tons of CO2, it has to buy a pass for that, and that pass costs money. That money is used to propagate the environmental policy of the union. Is that roughly right?
Roughly right. So I think that this is a more market-based approach compared to very strict standards. So you could imagine a policy when the governments will just say a steel mill or power plant just has to cease emitting CO2 and invest in other technology. And that would be a very central planning approach. Mm-hmm. What we have instead is that each company has a choice. It can buy this allowance or pass to emit, or it can invest in alternative technologies. Either in power sector it can be renewables, nuclear. We also have some low emission technologies in industry, and then they don't have to pay for CO2.
So if they are reducing emissions themselves, they don't have to buy passes? Indeed.
So the first movers get the advantage. And if you have a specific sector will have higher costs, they have flexibility. They can buy the allowances to get more time.
Okay. So why is there a need now to reform this policy?
So I would say that this is more of an adjustment of the whole system. So the previous rules were set as a part of 2030 package. So it's tailored to meet the 2030 targets for European Union. And if we don't change the rules after 2030, we run out of allowances of this space for emitting already by the end of the next decade. This is not actually something which was negotiated as a part of 2040 target half a year ago. I think that this is something which provides more space for industry specifically to invest in low carbon technologies. And at the same time, the member states, including Poland, will get more revenues over time to also support their citizens. So we need this adjustment in the road to climate neutrality as a part of the next step in this process.
So basically the European Commission got it wrong when they set the targets for 2030?
I wouldn't say so, because this was 2030 targets and 2030 package. But I think that this correction is required now because we have adjusted the next target for 2040 while keeping the 2050 net zero target. I think what has actually changed now in this proposal by the Commission is there's more emphasis on a kind of fair deal for industry, getting more time and more resources, more financial resources, both from the Commission and from the Member States, to actually invest in this type of transition. Because up to now, we had quite a few flexibilities how the Member States can use the money from the system, and there was quite limited support for, especially for these countries in our region, Central Eastern Europe, for decarbonizing the industry. And our industry faces some more hurdles than, for instance, Nordic countries or some industries.
What are those hurdles? I mean, why was there resistance from countries in this region, Central and Eastern Europe?
I think that there's once again a couple of challenges. One is that we are basically still catching up. So relatively to our incomes, we have to invest more, so as a percentage of our incomes. And then there's also accessibility of clean energy. So if we have in Nordic countries or some of the southern European countries, there's already a huge supply of clean power, which can be used to power the decarbonized industry, especially for electrification. In case of Poland, we still are transitioning our power sector, so there's limited amount of clean power which can power our industry. So this additional time, but also additional investment, for instance, in own supply of clean energy, is something which is needed to make the transition fair across the continent.
Okay, so basically, as I understand the picture, we're reducing the emissions of manufacturing in the European Union, and we're replacing it with clean energy. But there are problems. I mean, take, for example, Germany, which has closed down all of its nuclear power plants and is now reversing that, which is going to take, 10, 15 years to do. And there are some countries which have already invested in clean energy, and they're saying it's not fair that, countries like Poland are being given extra time. Why? How is the Commission going to deal with this?
Well, the Commission has proposed a solution, but we need to remember that actually the final decisions are being made by the Council, which represents the member state governments elected by the people, and the European Parliament, which once again is elected by European citizens. So we are at the start of a reform process. The Commission puts together a package which is then being negotiated in details. So what we expect is that for next year or so, we'll have a discussion about these details of parameters of sharing the benefits, revenues from the system, and also what are the specific rules, for instance, how you use the revenues. Because what is usually the case is that the northern countries, which usually provide the net payers to the system, they pressure on more accountability and more transparency for the use of the system, like with recovery fund, which I think in the longer run is also beneficial for our region, because we make sure that we actually invest in this clean investment rather than just use it for general budget purposes. Right.
I'd like to zoom out a little bit. Countries like China and the United States are not bound by this net zero policy. They can do what they like. Surely what we're doing is undermining European industry while we're making this transition over the next 10 or 15 years, and empowering China and America to actually produce the goods that we're buying from them. Aren't we?
It's a bit more complicated than that, because first, China is actually has set its domestic target for net zero for 2060, and they're investing a lot in supply side. So they are already a biggest producer of clean tech, but also they're now investing in transitioning of this more traditional industries like steel and cement. So if we fail to transition our own industries, in a few years we'll be facing the same problem as we're now facing with vehicles. So today, German manufacturing, for instance, is losing not only domestic market, it's also losing export markets. So Vietnam, for instance, is buying much more Chinese electric vehicles than German diesel vehicles. And this is not something which can be said that this is we should blame the green policies in Europe. Actually, China has introduced faster transition in part of its manufacturing base, which now converts to its exports, for instance, to South Asia. And we get, as Europe as a whole, we are getting squeezed out of these markets. This is one thing.
Out of the car market, the electric vehicles
markets.
Yeah, okay.
But also we have an element of a system in ETS called carbon border adjustment mechanism. So this is designed to make sure that when we import once again, steel or cement or other emission-intensive goods, that importers have to pay carbon price. So this has been added recently.
So it becomes more expensive for importers to buy products that were made in countries where there are no such restrictions.
Yes, so you don't have a situation when you can just not buy green steel made in Europe and just import emission-intensive steel from China, for instance.
So basically, producers are being squeezed on both ends, aren't they? I mean, they can't manufacture cheaply at the moment while they're going through this transition, and they have to pay higher prices when they import.
We need to look at each specific element of value chain. So for steel, the CBAM provides this kind of equal playing field against steelmaker from China, and then at each next step of supply chain, you actually see that the part of the costs associated with green materials actually decreases. So in the final product, it's using green materials costs additional 1 or 2%. So you can build a house using green cement and steel, and you'll have additional 1 or 2% of costs. The trick and the challenge is to make sure that on this basic material markets you actually have good protection, and then on the final markets this is already not a major competitive disadvantage. And actually, if you look closer, if you switch away from this fossil fuel dependence, you actually get more stable costs for these producers. So they are more less reliant on, for instance, what's happening in the Middle East. And once again, this is something which China now benefits from. They have much less exposure to the Middle East crisis because they have invested in electrification, in cleaner industries, and they're now once again selling more to the world.
Yes, but they're one of the major buyers of Russian oil and gas, so they aren't quite off the fossil fuels at all. Unfortunately, we're going to have to end our conversation. So much more to talk about, but thank you very much for taking the time to join us. Thank you. And that brings us to the end of this episode of World Talks. Don't go away, lots more coming up. Goodbye.